The massive crystalline spires of the draconic imperial palace stretched toward 3 moons hanging in the violet sky of Pirathon Prime. Within the highest tower, Emperor Vorthak the Crimson paced before floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked his vast empire. His scaled form, towering at nearly 12 feet, cast long shadows across the obsidian floors as his tail swept anxiously behind him. The Emperor's golden eyes, usually burning with the fire of conquest and authority, now held only worry. In the medical wing far below, his youngest son Cathara lay dying, and the greatest minds in the galaxy had declared the case hopeless. "Your Imperial Majesty," came a voice from behind. High Physician Zelkoth entered the chamber, his emerald scales dulled with exhaustion. Behind him followed 3 other medical specialists from different worlds, a crystalline being from the Quartz Collective, a tentacled mindweaver from the Outer Rim, and a biomechanical hybrid from the core systems. Emperor Vorthak turned slowly, hope and desperation warring in his expression. "Tell me you have found something, anything." Zelkoth's head lowered in defeat. "My lord, we have exhausted every known treatment. The genetic cascade failure affecting Prince Cathara is beyond our understanding. His draconic DNA is literally unraveling at the cellular level. We estimate he has perhaps days remaining." The crystalline being chimed in with a voice like wind through crystal caves. "The molecular degradation follows no pattern we recognize. It defies our most advanced theoretical models." The mindweaver's tentacles writhed as it projected thoughts directly into their minds. "Even our ability to interface with neural patterns shows only chaos." The prince's life force dims with each passing hour. Emperor Vorthak's claws scraped against the window as his fists clenched. For 3 centuries he had built an empire spanning 47 star systems. His dragon fleets had conquered worlds. His diplomats had forged alliances with hundreds of species, and his scientists had unlocked secrets of the universe that lesser civilizations couldn't imagine. Yet all his power meant nothing in the face of his child's illness. "There must be someone," the Emperor growled, his voice carrying the rumble of distant thunder. "Send word to every world, every species, every healer and scientist in known space. Offer them anything, wealth, territory, technology. I don't care if they're from the most primitive worlds or the most advanced civilizations." "Your Majesty," the biomechanical hybrid interjected, its voice a mixture of organic and synthetic tones. "We have already consulted with the Ethereal Council, the Time Walker physicians, and even the mysterious Void surgeons. None possess knowledge of this condition." The Emperor's roar shook the entire tower. "Then look beyond known space. Contact the fringe worlds, the isolated systems, the forgotten colonies. Leave no stone unturned, no possibility unexplored." In the depths of the palace, servants scurried through corridors carrying out the Emperor's desperate decree. Messages shot across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds, reaching every corner of civilized space and beyond. The Dragon Empire's vast communication network buzzed with activity as the call went out to healers, scientists, mystics, and anyone who might possess even the smallest fragment of knowledge that could save Prince Cathara. Meanwhile, in the palace's lower levels where the maintenance staff worked, a human named Marcus Chun pushed his cleaning cart down a dimly lit corridor. Unlike the grand halls above where courtiers and dignitaries walked on polished marble, these service tunnels were purely functional, metal grating, exposed conduits, and the constant hum of the palace's life support systems. Marcus had worked here for 6 months now, one of the few humans employed in the palace. Most species in the Empire considered humans to be useful but unremarkable, decent at manual labor and basic technical work, but lacking the advanced capabilities of more evolved races. They were tolerated rather than respected, seen as a stepping stone species that might someday develop into something more significant. As he cleaned, Marcus couldn't help but overhear the urgent conversations echoing through the ventilation shafts. The entire palace was in upheaval over the young prince's condition. Even the maintenance staff spoke in hushed, worried tones about the heir to the throne lying near death just floors above them. Marcus paused in his work, leaning against his mop handle as he thought about what he'd heard. The descriptions of the prince's symptoms, the genetic cascade failure, the cellular degradation, the mysterious nature of the illness, triggered something in the back of his mind. It reminded him of something from his childhood, something his grandmother had told him, about an old illness that had once affected human colonists on the frontier worlds, but that was impossible, wasn't it? The greatest medical minds in the galaxy had declared the case hopeless. What could a simple human janitor possibly know that they didn't? Marcus shook his head and returned to his cleaning, pushing the thought away. He was just a maintenance worker, invisible to the important people above. His job was to keep the corridors clean, not to dream of saving imperial princes, yet as he worked through the night, the nagging feeling wouldn't leave him alone. Somewhere in his memory, buried beneath years of ordinary life, was a piece of information that might be crucial. The question was whether he would have the courage to act on it, knowing that stepping beyond his place in the rigid hierarchy of the palace could mean exile or worse. The hours ticked by. And in the medical wing above, Prince Kithara's condition continued to deteriorate. The finest physicians in the galaxy stood helpless as the young dragon's life slipped away, while in the tunnels below, a human janitor wrestled with a decision that would change everything. Marcus couldn't sleep that night. After his shift ended, he returned to his small quarters in the staff housing complex, but his mind kept racing. The memory that had surfaced during his work grew stronger and clearer as he lay in his narrow bunk. Staring at the metal ceiling, his grandmother, Elena-chan, had been a frontier medic on the colony world of New Terra Firma. She'd treated everything from mining accidents to alien diseases during humanity's early expansion period. Marcus remembered her stories about the genetic cascade syndrome that had appeared in some of the first human settlements, how it attacked the DNA itself, causing cellular breakdown that resembled what he'd overheard about the prince's condition. The treatment had been surprisingly simple, almost primitive by galactic standards. A combination of ancient human herbs and a specific protein sequence that human bodies produced naturally under certain stress conditions. The frontier medics had discovered it purely by accident when a mining crew, stranded and living off native plants, had somehow recovered from what should have been a fatal genetic illness, but that was over a century ago, affecting humans on a backwater world. Surely such primitive medicine couldn't help an advanced draconic physiology. The Empire's physicians used quantum-level cellular manipulation, bio-neural interfaces, and treatments that bent the laws of physics themselves. How could herbs and simple proteins compare to such sophisticated medicine? Marcus sat up in his bunk, running his hands through his hair. He was being ridiculous, but the nagging voice in his head wouldn't quit. What if the advanced treatments were actually making things worse? What if the prince's condition required something simple, something that the sophisticated medical technology couldn't provide? He thought about his position in the palace hierarchy. Humans were among the lowest-ranking species in the Dragon Empire, useful for basic labor but not considered capable of complex thought or innovation. If he tried to approach the medical staff with his theory, they would likely dismiss him without a second thought. Worse, they might see his presumption as an insult to their expertise and have him exiled from the palace entirely. But a child was dying. A child whose life might depend on knowledge that only Marcus possessed. As the palace's first moon began to set, Marcus made his decision. He couldn't approach the high-ranking physicians directly, but he knew the layout of the palace better than almost anyone. The maintenance tunnels and service corridors provided access to nearly every room, including the medical wing. If he could just get a look at the prince, perhaps see the symptoms firsthand, he might be able to confirm whether his theory had any merit. Marcus dressed quietly and slipped out of his quarters. The staff housing was nearly empty at this hour. Most of the night shift workers were busy in the main palace, while the day staff slept. He made his way through the familiar maze of service tunnels, his footsteps silent on the metal grating. The medical wing was heavily secured, but Marcus had cleaned these corridors dozens of times. He knew about the maintenance access panel hidden behind a false wall, designed for emergency repairs to the life support systems. More importantly, he knew the guard rotation patterns and the brief window when the hallway outside the prince's room would be UNMONITOR, as he crawled through the narrow maintenance shaft. Marcus could hear voices coming from the medical bay ahead. The physicians were still working, their voices tense with frustration and exhaustion. Through a ventilation grate, he could see into the room where Prince Kithara lay. The young dragon was smaller than Marcus had expected. Perhaps the size of a human teenager despite being only 8 years old in draconic terms. His scales, which should have been a brilliant copper gold, had faded to a sickly gray-green. Monitoring equipment surrounded the bed, displaying readings that even Marcus could tell were dangerously low, but it was the specific pattern of deterioration that confirmed Marcus's suspicions. The way the scales were loosening and falling away, the particular discoloration around the joints, the labored breathing pattern, it all matched the historical descriptions his grandmother had shared. This wasn't some exotic alien disease beyond human understanding. It was genetic cascade syndrome, the same condition that had nearly wiped out early human colonies. High Physician Zelkoth stood over the prince, his usually pristine scales dulled with exhaustion. "The quantum stabilizers are showing no effect," he reported to a colleague. "The cellular matrix continues to deteriorate despite our most advanced treatments." "Perhaps we should try the ethereal healing chambers again," suggested another physician. "The energy manipulation might—" "We've already attempted that twice," Zelkoth interrupted. "The prince's condition actually worsened after each session. It's as if our treatments are accelerating the breakdown rather than preventing it." Marcus felt his heart race. That was exactly what had happened on the frontier worlds. The more advanced the attempted treatment, the faster the syndrome progressed. The solution his grandmother had discovered worked precisely because it was simple, natural, and didn't interfere with the body's own attempts to heal. But how could he possibly get this information to the physicians? He was a janitor, invisible to the medical staff. Even if he tried to speak to them, they would never listen to treatment suggestions from a human maintenance worker. As Marcus watched through the grate, Prince Kithara's breathing became more labored. The young dragon's eyes fluttered open briefly, looking around the sterile medical bay with confusion and fear before closing again. Time was running out. Marcus made another decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. He couldn't reach the physicians through normal channels, but there was another way. The palace's emergency communication system, designed to reach the Emperor himself in case of critical threats, had terminals throughout the building, including one in the maintenance section he was currently hiding in. If he could access that terminal and send a message directly to Emperor Vorthek, explaining what he knew about the prince's condition, maybe someone would listen. It was an incredible breach of protocol that would likely result in his immediate imprisonment. But Marcus realized he no longer cared about the consequences. A child's life hung in the balance, and he might be the only person in the galaxy who knew how to save it. Marcus crawled back through the maintenance shaft with his heart pounding so hard he was sure the entire palace could hear it. The emergency communication terminal was located in a restricted section of the service area, protected by security measures designed to prevent unauthorized access. But Marcus had been cleaning around these systems for months, and he'd noticed something the security designers had overlooked. The biometric scanner that protected the terminal required a palm print from authorized personnel, but the maintenance access panel below used a simple electronic lock that Marcus had the codes for. More importantly, the terminal's power supply ran through the same conduit as the life support systems he regularly serviced. If he could create a brief power fluctuation that forced the system into emergency override mode, the security lockouts would temporarily disable. His hands shook as he accessed the power junction box. What he was about to do was so far beyond his authority that it qualified as treason against the Empire. But every time he hesitated, he thought of Prince Kithra's labored breathing and the desperation in Emperor Vorthek's golden eyes. The power flickered throughout that section of the palace. Emergency lighting activated as the main systems reset, and for exactly 37 seconds, the communication terminal was accessible without security clearance. Marcus typed faster than he'd ever typed in his life, his message pouring out in a desperate stream of words. Your Imperial Majesty, I am Marcus Chun, Maintenance Staff Level 7. I believe I know what is killing Prince Kithara. The symptoms match an illness called genetic cascade syndrome that affected human colonies over a century ago. The condition appears when DNA repair mechanisms fail due to exposure to certain quantum frequencies, the same frequencies used in advanced medical equipment. Every advanced treatment makes it worse. The cure is simple. Stop all technological intervention and administer a specific protein sequence found in Terran chamomile and elderberry, combined with controlled exposure to natural sunlight. Please. Check the historical medical records from New Terra Firma Colony, year 2387. I know this sounds impossible, but I am willing to stake my life on this information. Marcus Chun, Staff ID 7749 Delta. The terminal security reactivated just as Marcus finished sending the message. He quickly restored power to normal levels and retreated to his quarters, where he sat on his bunk and waited for the Imperial guards to come arrest him. Hours passed. Marcus expected to hear heavy footsteps in the corridor, the sound of his door being forced open, the harsh commands of guards dragging him away. Instead, the staff housing remained quiet. Either his message had been lost in the system, dismissed as a prank, or simply buried under more important communications. As dawn broke over Pirathan Prime, Marcus reported for his regular shift, trying to act as if nothing had changed. But as he pushed his cart through the service corridors, he noticed increased activity throughout the palace. Guards moved with more urgency, servants whispered in concerned tones, and the very air seemed charged with tension. It wasn't until mid-morning that Marcus learned what had happened. While cleaning near the medical wing, he overheard two junior physicians talking in hushed voices. The Emperor himself reviewed the historical records, one was saying. Apparently, there was some communication about an old human illness that matches the prince's symptoms. You can't be serious, the other replied. Ancient human medicine? We're talking about quantum-level cellular manipulation here, not primitive herb grinding. That's what everyone thought, but High Physician Zelkoth is reviewing the data personally. The Emperor demanded it. Marcus nearly dropped his mop. His message had reached the Emperor, and someone was actually investigating his claims. But would they find the connection in time? And even if they did, would the medical staff be willing to abandon their sophisticated treatments in favor of what seemed like primitive folklore? As if in answer to his thoughts, an announcement echoed through the palace communication system. All medical staff report to Conference Room Alpha immediately. Priority 1 authorization. Marcus abandoned his cleaning cart and made his way to a maintenance access point near the conference room. Through the ventilation system, he could hear the voices of the galaxy's most respected physicians as they gathered for an emergency meeting. Emperor Vorthok's voice filled the room, carrying the weight of absolute authority mixed with a father's desperation. I have reviewed the historical records from the human colony world of New Terra Firma. The symptoms described in their medical logs are identical to what we observe in Prince Kithara. Identical? Your Majesty, came Zelkoth's voice, carefully respectful but skeptical. While the similarities are remarkable, the proposed treatment seems almost impossibly primitive. We're talking about plant extracts and natural sunlight against a genetic cascade failure. The records show a 93% survival rate when this treatment was applied, the Emperor responded. What is our current success rate with advanced intervention? Silence filled the room. Marcus could almost feel the uncomfortable shifting of the assembled physicians. Your Majesty, another voice ventured, if we abandon quantum stabilization and bioneural therapy, we could accelerate the prince's decline. These primitive treatments lack any scientific basis that we can understand. And yet, the Emperor's voice carried a dangerous edge. Every advanced treatment we have attempted has made his condition worse. The historical records indicate that sophisticated medical intervention actually triggers more severe symptoms. How does our science explain that? Marcus held his breath as he waited for their response. Through the grate, he could see Emperor Vorthok standing at the head of the conference table, his massive form radiating barely controlled power. The physicians, for all their expertise and status, looked small and uncertain in the face of the Dragon Emperor's intensity. "There's one way to test this theory," High Physician Zelkoth said finally. "We could suspend all technological intervention for a measured period and observe whether the prince's condition stabilizes. If there's any improvement, we could consider implementing the suggested treatment protocol." "How long?" the Emperor demanded. 12 hours should be sufficient to determine whether the absence of quantum-level treatment has any effect." "Do it," Emperor Vorthak commanded. "Immediately. And I want the complete historical treatment protocol prepared and ready for implementation. If we see any improvement after suspending our current methods, we proceed with the human colony treatment." As the physicians filed out to implement the Emperor's orders, Marcus remained hidden in the maintenance shaft, hardly believing what he had just witnessed. The greatest medical minds in the galaxy were about to test a theory proposed by a human janitor, based on century-old frontier medicine that most of the Empire would consider impossibly primitive. Now came the hardest part, waiting to see if he was right or if his intervention would cost Prince Kithara the precious time he had left. The silence in the medical wing was deafening. For the first time in days, the constant hum of quantum stabilizers and bioneural processors had ceased. Prince Kithara lay in his bed surrounded by simple monitoring equipment that tracked only basic vital signs, while the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy sat powered down and unused. High Physician Zelkoth paced nervously around the room, checking and rechecking the basic monitors every few minutes. The other physicians stood at a respectful distance, their usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. They were operating completely outside their realm of expertise now, relying on nothing but observation and hope. "His breathing seems slightly less labored," one of the junior physicians observed after the first hour. "Coincidence," Zelkoth muttered. But Marcus could see through the ventilation grate that the High Physician was studying the readings more carefully than he wanted to admit. Emperor Vorthak had not left his son's side since the advanced treatments were suspended. The massive dragon sat in a specially reinforced chair beside the bed, his golden eyes never leaving the young prince's face. His usual commanding presence was subdued, replaced by the quiet intensity of a father watching over his dying child. As the hours passed, subtle changes began to appear. The discoloration around Prince Kithara's joints seemed less pronounced. The rate at which his scales were falling had decreased noticeably. Most importantly, his breathing had indeed become more regular and less strained. It could still be natural fluctuation in the disease process, Zelkoth said when the Emperor pointed out these improvements, but his voice lacked conviction. The High Physician had spent decades studying medicine across dozens of species, and he had never seen genetic cascade syndrome stabilize on its own by the 8th hour. Even the most skeptical physicians could no longer deny what they were witnessing. Prince Kithara's vital signs had improved across every measurable parameter. The cellular degradation that had been accelerating for days had not just stopped, it was beginning to reverse itself. "Impossible," whispered the crystalline physician, its harmonic voice carrying notes of amazement. "The quantum coherence of his cellular structure is actually improving without any intervention." The Mindweaver extended its tentacles toward the prince, reading the bioelectrical patterns of his nervous system. The chaos in his neural pathways is resolving. The pattern suggests his body is beginning to repair the genetic damage naturally. Emperor Vorthak's claws scraped against the floor as he leaned forward. "How long until we know for certain?" "If this improvement continues for another 4 hours," Zelkoth replied slowly, as if he could hardly believe his own words, "then we must conclude that the cessation of advanced treatment is indeed helping the prince recover." Marcus, still hidden in his observation post, felt a mixture of relief and terror. His theory was proving correct, but now came the even more challenging part. The physicians would soon need to implement the actual treatment protocol from the frontier colonies, and that would require ingredients and procedures that the sophisticated medical bay simply wasn't equipped for. As if reading his thoughts, Emperor Vorthak stood from his chair, towering over the assembled medical staff. Assuming this stabilization continues, I want the complete human colony treatment protocol ready for implementation. What do we need? Zelkoth consulted a datapad containing the historical records. According to the new terra firma medical logs, the treatment requires extracts from two specific Terran plants, chamomile and elderberry. The active compounds must be prepared using traditional extraction methods, not synthesized artificially. Additionally, the patient requires exposure to unfiltered natural sunlight for specific periods during the treatment cycle. Problems? The Emperor asked, noting the hesitation in the physician's voice. Several, Your Majesty. First, we have no chamomile or elderberry plants in the palace, nor any suppliers of such primitive botanical materials. Second, the extraction methods described in the records are extremely basic, essentially boiling the plants in water and filtering the result. Our medical staff has no experience with such crude techniques. Finally, this medical bay is deep within the palace structure, with no access to natural sunlight. The Emperor's eyes blazed with frustrated determination. Then we obtain what we need. Send ships to the nearest human worlds. Commandeer every available transport if necessary. I want those plants here within hours. Your Majesty, another physician interjected, even if we obtain the plants, none of us knows how to prepare them properly. The historical records provide only basic descriptions, not the precise techniques that would ensure proper extraction of the active compounds. It was at this moment that Marcus made the most important decision of his life. Prince Cathara was improving, but he would need the actual treatment to fully recover. The palace physicians, for all their advanced training, lacked the simple, practical knowledge needed to prepare frontier medicine. And Marcus was quite possibly the only person in the palace who had that knowledge. His grandmother had been thorough in her stories, describing not just the dramatic rescues and medical breakthroughs, but also the practical details of frontier life. How to prepare medicinal teas using proper water temperature and steeping times. How to extract essential compounds from plants using nothing but basic equipment. How to recognize when a preparation was ready. And how to adjust dosages for different patient needs. Marcus emerged from the maintenance shaft and walked directly into the medical bay. His maintenance uniform a stark contrast to the sophisticated medical robes around him. Every head turned as the human janitor appeared in the most restricted area of the palace. But Marcus kept walking until he stood directly in front of Emperor Vorthak. Your Imperial Majesty, Marcus said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I am Marcus Chun, the one who sent you the message about the prince's condition. I know how to prepare the treatment your son needs. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Emperor Vorthak studied the human who had dared to enter his son's medical bay uninvited, his golden eyes taking in every detail of Marcus's appearance and demeanor. You are certain of this knowledge? The Emperor asked, his voice carrying both hope and warning. Marcus nodded. My grandmother was a frontier medic who treated this exact condition. She taught me the traditional preparation methods before she died. I know the proper techniques, the correct proportions, and how to recognize when the treatment is ready. High Physician Zelkoth stepped forward, his expression torn between outrage at the human's presumption and desperate hope for any solution. Your Majesty, surely we cannot entrust the prince's treatment to a maintenance worker with no formal medical training. Emperor Vorthak's gaze never left Marcus's face. This maintenance worker identified my son's condition when the greatest minds in the galaxy could not. His suggested treatment has already begun saving my son's life. What formal training do you have that is relevant to frontier human medicine, High Physician? The pointed question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus realized that in this moment the Emperor was not seeing him as a lowly human janitor, but as the person who might hold the key to his son's survival. Within 3 hours, the fastest ships in the Dragon Empire had delivered fresh chamomile and elderberry plants to the palace. The Emperor's botanical specialists had scoured human agricultural worlds, finally locating specimens that matched the exact genetic profiles described in the new terra firma medical records. Now those plants sat on a simple table in the medical bay. Looking impossibly primitive beside the sophisticated equipment that surrounded them, Marcus stood before the table, acutely aware that dozens of the galaxy's most brilliant medical minds were watching his every move. Emperor Vorthak loomed behind him, radiating protective intensity that would have terrified most beings. But Marcus felt surprisingly calm as he examined the plants, his grandmother's training taking over. "The water temperature is critical," Marcus explained as he worked, speaking to the assembled physicians who hung on his every word. "Too hot and you destroy the delicate compounds. Too cool and they won't extract properly. Grandmother used to say it should be hot enough to see steam, but not hot enough to bubble vigorously." He demonstrated the technique, crushing the chamomile flowers gently between his palms to release their oils before adding them to the carefully heated water. The sweet, apple-like scent filled the medical bay, a stark contrast to the sterile, antiseptic smell that usually dominated the space. "The elderberries require different handling," Marcus continued, working with practiced ease despite the pressure. "They need to be mashed first but not pulverized. You want to break the cell walls without destroying the structure completely." High Physician Zelkoth watched with fascination as Marcus prepared the medicine using techniques that predated galactic civilization. "The precision required is remarkable," he admitted grudgingly. "Our synthesizers could produce these compounds artificially, but the record suggests that artificial preparation reduces effectiveness by 70%. Something about the natural extraction process preserves molecular bonds that artificial synthesis can't replicate," Marcus agreed. Grandmother never understood the science behind it, but she knew it worked. As the preparation steeped, Marcus explained the timing protocols. "The chamomile needs exactly 12 minutes for full extraction, but the elderberry preparation requires 18. If you combine them too early or too late, the chemical interaction changes and the treatment becomes less effective." Emperor Vorthak observed every detail with intense focus. How did primitive colonists discover such precise requirements? "Trial and error," Marcus replied, carefully monitoring the timing. "And desperation. When people are dying and you have nothing but plants and hope, you try everything until something works." The colonists who survived were the ones who kept detailed records and shared their successes. Prince Kithara stirred slightly in his bed, the first voluntary movement he'd made in days. His scales had regained some of their natural copper color, and his breathing continued to improve. The 12 hours of suspended treatment had proven beyond doubt that advanced medical intervention had been making his condition worse. "Movement indicates neurological improvement," the Mindweaver observed, its tentacles detecting subtle changes in the prince's brainwave patterns. "The genetic cascade reversal is accelerating." Marcus finished combining the preparations according to his grandmother's instructions, creating a golden-brown liquid that looked nothing like the sophisticated medications usually administered in the medical bay. "The dosage needs to be adjusted for his body weight and species," he said, looking to the physicians for guidance. "The records were based on human physiology." "According to our calculations," Zelkoth said, consulting his instruments, "the prince's metabolic rate suggests he would need approximately 1.7 times the human dosage, administered every 4 hours for the first day, then twice daily for a week." Marcus nodded, then looked directly at Emperor Vorthak. "Your Majesty, there's one more requirement that might be difficult to meet. The treatment works best when combined with direct exposure to natural sunlight. The historical records suggest at least 2 hours per day during the active treatment phase." The Emperor's expression grew thoughtful. "This medical bay is deep within the palace structure. Moving the prince could be dangerous in his current condition." "Actually," Marcus said quietly, "there might be another option. The palace has observation domes on several upper levels, designed for astronomical observation. If we could move the prince's bed to one of those chambers during the daylight hours, he would receive the natural sunlight exposure he needs while remaining in a controlled medical environment." High Physician Zelkoth looked surprised. "How does a maintenance worker know about the astronomical facilities?" "I clean them," Marcus replied simply. The observation dome on level 47 has the best solar exposure and could easily accommodate medical equipment. Emperor Vorthak made his decision with characteristic decisiveness. Prepare the transfer. I want the prince moved to the observation dome within the hour. And Marcus Chung, he turned to face the human directly, you will personally oversee his treatment until he recovers completely. The pronouncement sent shock waves through the assembled medical staff. A human maintenance worker was being given authority over the treatment of the imperial heir, superseding physicians with centuries of training and experience. Your Majesty, Zelkoth protested carefully, while we acknowledge this human's unique knowledge, surely the treatment should remain under proper medical supervision. The proper medical supervision nearly killed my son, Emperor Vorthak interrupted, his voice carrying the rumble of contained thunder. This human identified the problem when you could not, proposed the solution when you had none, and possesses the practical knowledge to implement the treatment when you lack the skills. He has earned the right to see this through. Marcus felt the weight of the Emperor's trust and the medical staff's resentment in equal measure, but as he looked at Prince Kithara, seeing the young dragon's breathing grow stronger with each passing hour, he knew he would not fail. His grandmother's legacy, carried in memories and practical knowledge, was about to save the life of the most important child in the galaxy. The transfer to the observation dome began immediately, with the prince's bed carefully transported through the palace corridors. As they moved higher in the structure, natural light began to filter through the crystalline walls, and Marcus could swear he saw Prince Kithara's scales grow brighter in response. The real test was about to begin. The observation dome had been hastily converted into a makeshift medical facility, with Prince Kithara's bed positioned directly beneath the transparent crystalline ceiling. As Pirathan Prime's sun climbed higher in the violet sky, natural light flooded the chamber, illuminating the young dragon with warm, unfiltered radiation that had traveled across space unchanged. Marcus administered the first dose of the herbal preparation personally, carefully measuring the golden liquid and ensuring proper delivery. Prince Kithara was conscious now, his eyes tracking movement around the room, though he remained too weak to speak. The improvement from just suspending advanced treatment had been remarkable, but the real test would come in the next few hours. Emperor Vorthak had not left his son's side during the transfer. The massive dragon emperor sat beside the bed, one clawed hand resting gently on Prince Kithara's arm, providing comfort and reassurance. For all his power and authority, in this moment he was simply a father hoping for his child's recovery. The sunlight exposure needs to be gradual, Marcus explained to the medical staff who continued monitoring the prince's vital signs. Too much too quickly can overwhelm the healing process. We start with 30-minute sessions and increase duration as his condition improves. High Physician Zelkoth observed the proceedings with professional fascination mixed with personal humility. The quantum resonance patterns in his cellular structure are stabilizing in ways our instruments can barely measure, he reported. Whatever mechanism drives this treatment operates at a level we don't fully understand. Sometimes the best medicine isn't the most sophisticated, Marcus replied, checking the prince's pulse according to techniques his grandmother had taught him. The frontier colonists learned that their bodies often knew how to heal themselves if you just provided the right environment and stopped interfering with the process. As the first hour passed under natural sunlight, the changes in Prince Kithara became undeniable. His scales regained their lustrous copper-gold color, no longer falling away but actually regrowing in areas where they had been lost. His breathing became deep and regular, and his eyes showed increasing alertness and awareness. "Papa?" The word was barely a whisper, but it carried the force of a thunderclap through the observation dome. Prince Kithara was trying to speak, looking up at his father with recognition and intelligence for the first time in days. Emperor Vorthak's composure nearly cracked. His golden eyes glistened as he leaned closer to his son. "I'm here, little flame. Rest now. You're going to be fine." Marcus stepped back, allowing the father and son their moment while continuing to monitor the treatment protocol. The herbal medicine was working exactly as his grandmother's records had described. But he knew the most critical phase was still ahead. The first day of treatment often showed dramatic improvement, but maintaining that progress required careful attention to dosage, timing, and environmental factors. The next dose should be administered in 3 hours and 47 minutes, Marcus informed the medical staff. The timing is crucial. Too early and you overwhelm his system. Too late and the therapeutic levels drop below effectiveness. Dr. Zelkoth nodded, making detailed notes about every aspect of the treatment. We're documenting everything for future reference. This knowledge could revolutionize our approach to genetic disorders across multiple species. The frontier medics would be amazed, Marcus said with a slight smile. They thought they were just trying to keep colonists alive long enough to build civilization. They had no idea they were developing treatments that would one day save imperial princes. As the day progressed, Prince Kithara continued to improve. By the third dose of medication, he was able to sit up in bed and carry on simple conversations. His appetite returned, and he began asking for his favorite foods, a sure sign that his body was recovering its normal functions. Emperor Vorthak remained in the observation dome, conducting imperial business from his son's bedside while ensuring he missed no moment of the recovery. Ministers and advisors came and went, but the emperor's attention remained focused primarily on Prince Kithara's progress. Marcus, the prince called during one of the afternoon sunlight sessions. His voice was stronger now, carrying the natural authority that came with his royal bloodline despite his young age. Papa says you saved my life? Marcus approached the bed, still somewhat overwhelmed by his proximity to imperial royalty. I just remembered something my grandmother taught me, Your Highness. The real credit belongs to the frontier medics who figured out the treatment originally. But you were brave enough to speak up when everyone else said there was no hope. Prince Kithara replied with wisdom that seemed beyond his years. That took courage. Emperor Vorthak studied Marcus with a thoughtful expression. Indeed it did. You risked everything to share knowledge that could help my son, despite having no guarantee you would be believed or even heard. A child was dying, Marcus said simply. How could I stay silent when I might know something that could help? As evening approached and Pirathan Prime's sun began to set, Marcus prepared the final dose of the day. Prince Kithara's recovery had exceeded even the most optimistic projections from the frontier medical records. His vital signs were approaching normal ranges. His scales had regained their full color and luster, and his energy levels were returning to what was typical for a young dragon. Tomorrow we can reduce the sunlight exposure sessions, Marcus explained to the medical staff. The acute phase is passing, and from here it becomes more about supporting his body's natural healing processes rather than intensive intervention. Hi. Physician Zelkoth approached Marcus. As the day shift prepared to hand over monitoring duties to the night team, I owe you an apology, he said formally. When you first appeared in the medical bay, I dismissed you as presumptuous and unqualified. I failed to recognize that true wisdom sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources. No apology needed, Marcus replied. You had every reason to be skeptical. I would have been too in your position. But as Marcus prepared to return to his quarters for the night, Emperor Vorthak called him aside for a private conversation. The massive dragon's expression was serious, and Marcus felt a flutter of nervousness about what the Emperor might want to discuss. Marcus Chun, the Emperor began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, tomorrow we need to discuss your future. You have proven yourself to be far more than a simple maintenance worker, and my empire has need of individuals with your unique combination of knowledge, courage, and wisdom. Marcus bowed respectfully, uncertain what such a conversation might entail, but knowing that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined just days before. 3 weeks later, Prince Kithara was racing through the palace gardens with the boundless energy of a healthy young dragon. His scales gleamed like burnished copper in the sunlight, and his laughter echoed through corridors that had been filled with worry and desperation just a short time before. The complete recovery had exceeded everyone's expectations, including those of the frontier medical records that had served as the treatment guide. Marcus, stood in Emperor Vorthak's private study, wearing not the simple maintenance uniform he had worn for months, but the deep blue robes of an imperial medical advisor. The transformation still felt surreal, but the weight of his new responsibilities was becoming increasingly real. The medical colleges across the empire are requesting copies of the complete treatment protocols, Emperor Vorthak reported, reviewing data from across his vast domain. 17 other cases of genetic cascade syndrome have been identified in the past 2 weeks, all previously misdiagnosed as incurable conditions. Marcus nodded, still adjusting to being consulted on matters of galactic importance. The frontier records mention that the syndrome appeared in several different species during the early colonization period. The treatment protocols can be adapted for different physiologies with proper medical supervision. Which brings me to my proposal, the Emperor continued, turning to face Marcus directly. I want to establish a new medical research institute dedicated to studying traditional healing methods from primitive worlds. Too often, our advanced civilizations dismiss older knowledge as obsolete, when in reality it may contain insights that our sophisticated techniques cannot replicate. The proposal was staggering in its implications. The Dragon Empire's resources devoted to preserving and studying the medical traditions of supposedly primitive civilizations would revolutionize healthcare across known space. It would also elevate the status of species like humanity, whose knowledge had previously been considered quaint but irrelevant. You want me to head this institute? Marcus said, finally understanding the direction of their conversation. I want you to design it, the Emperor corrected. The position of director should go to someone with both traditional medical training and the vision to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern science. But the institute needs to be created by someone who truly understands the value of that traditional knowledge. Marcus thought about his grandmother, who had saved lives using techniques passed down through generations of frontier medics. She had never imagined that her simple remedies might one day be studied by the greatest minds in the galaxy, or that her stories told to a young grandson would reshape imperial medical policy. There would need to be extensive field research, Marcus said, his mind already working through the practical challenges. Most traditional medical knowledge isn't written down in accessible formats. It's preserved in oral traditions, cultural practices, and hands-on techniques that have to be learned directly from practitioners. Resources are no limitation, the Emperor assured him. I'm prepared to fund research expeditions to every world in the Empire and beyond if necessary. The potential benefits justify any cost. A soft chime indicated someone requesting entry to the study. Prince Kithara bounded in, still radiating the irrepressible energy of youth, but now carrying himself with the dignity expected of imperial heir. His recovery had been so complete that it was hard to believe he had been near death less than a month ago. Marcus, the young prince exclaimed. Father says you might be traveling to other worlds to learn more medicine. Can I come with you sometimes? I want to learn about the places where your grandmother worked. Emperor Vorthak smiled at his son's enthusiasm. Perhaps when you're older, little flame. For now, your studies keep you quite busy enough. But I want to understand how it works, Prince Kithara insisted with the persistence that was his birthright. If simple plants and sunlight can cure diseases that our best doctors couldn't treat, what other knowledge are we missing? What other people are we overlooking because we think they're primitive? The question hung in the air with profound implications. Marcus realized that Prince Kithara had grasped something that many adults in positions of power failed to understand. That wisdom could come from unexpected sources, and that dismissing entire civilizations as primitive meant losing access to knowledge that might prove invaluable. That's exactly the right question to ask, Marcus told the young prince. And it's why this research institute is so important. There are probably thousands of worlds with traditional knowledge that could help people, but we'll never discover it if we don't take the time to listen and learn. Over the following months, the Imperial Institute for Traditional Medical Research took shape under Marcus's guidance. Teams of researchers began visiting human frontier worlds, documenting the medical practices that had kept colonists alive in harsh conditions. But the scope expanded beyond humanity as they discovered that every species had traditional healing methods that had been abandoned in favor of more sophisticated technologies. The crystalline collective had harmonic healing techniques that could repair cellular damage through specific sound frequencies. The tentacled mindweavers possessed mental healing practices that could cure psychological disorders by restructuring thought patterns. Even the mechanical species from the core systems had maintenance traditions that applied to biological systems in unexpected ways. Marcus found himself traveling constantly, learning from healers and medicine keepers across the galaxy. Each world taught him something new about the intersection of traditional wisdom and universal healing principles. His grandmother's stories had been just the beginning of a vast library of knowledge that had been waiting for someone to recognize its value. The transformation in how the Empire viewed traditional knowledge created ripple effects throughout galactic society. Species that had been considered backward found themselves elevated to respected positions as keepers of valuable wisdom. Trade relationships shifted as worlds that had been ignored suddenly became important sources of medical knowledge and healing techniques, but perhaps the most significant change was in how people thought about intelligence and advancement. The assumption that newer was always better, that sophisticated technology was inherently superior to simple solutions, began to give way to a more nuanced understanding of knowledge and wisdom. Prince Cathara, now fully grown and serving as his father's heir, often accompanied Marcus on research expeditions. The experience of being saved by traditional medicine had shaped his worldview, making him an advocate for inclusive approaches to knowledge and problem-solving. "You know what I learned from almost dying?" he once told Marcus as they visited a remote world where elderly healers were teaching them about fungal-based treatments. "The most important discoveries often come from the people everyone else ignores. My father rules an empire, but you, a human janitor, were the only person who knew how to save my life." Marcus smiled, thinking about how his grandmother would have reacted to being called one of the galaxy's most important medical researchers. She always said that every person you meet knows something you don't. The trick is being humble enough to listen and learn from them. As their ship prepared to depart for the next research destination, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him from pushing a cleaning cart through palace corridors to advising an emperor on medical policy. The transformation had started with a simple decision to speak up when a child needed help, but it had grown into something much larger, a recognition that wisdom and knowledge could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the most advanced civilizations had the most to learn from those they considered primitive. The Dragon Empire's approach to medicine had been forever changed by the day a human janitor refused to stay silent while a prince suffered. And across the galaxy, the ripple effects of that decision continued to save lives and challenge assumptions about knowledge, wisdom, and the value of every voice in the vast community of species that called the stars their home.